The house looked perfect. Old brick, tall windows, a spacious yard covered in dry autumn leaves. A dream for any family. But the moment we walked through the door, I knew something was wrong. And that night, we would learn that some pacts are never broken. My name is Daniel Carter, and my wife, Lauren, and I were starting over. We had moved into the house with our 6-year-old daughter, Ivy, wanting a quiet life after a difficult year. The realtor had assured us that no one had lived there in decades. But as we unloaded the boxes, Ivy looked up at the second floor and smiled. "Who's that girl in the window?" Lauren and I exchanged glances. "What girl, honey?" Ivy pointed upstairs. She was there, but now she's gone into hiding. My chest tightened. The upstairs was empty. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could. All the rooms were locked. Not a single living soul was there, or at least not a soul that belonged in this world. That first night, I tried to ignore it. The boxes were piled up in the hallway. Lauren was fast asleep. And then I heard footsteps upstairs, software light, like a child's. I swallowed hard. It must be Ivy, I thought. But when I looked to the side, Ivy was sleeping next to me in bed. The hallway was freezing. My breath formed small clouds of steam as I walked to the stairs. The shades on the windows trembled in the early morning wind. The silence was absolute until, bam! A door slammed upstairs. My muscles locked. My instincts told me not to go up, but something was pulling me. I pushed the door open slowly. The room was dark, smelling of old wood and dust. The half-open window creaked in the cold wind. In the corner of the room, something made me freeze. Footprints, small, marked in the dust. And then, on the wall, something written in crooked letters. "Don't leave the house." The paint was still wet. Or wasn't it paint? My hands shook. I turned to leave the room, and that's when I saw the reflection in the mirror. A girl, pale skin, dark hair, eyes as deep as holes. She was watching me, and before I could blink, she smiled. The girl smiled in the mirror, but she wasn't in the room. I turned around quickly, my heart hammering in my chest. Nothing, just the suffocating silence of the house. But then, the mirror shook, and I heard it, a whisper coming from the glass. "She's coming." My feet moved backwards on their own. The wind from the half-open window made my skin crawl. On the floor, the footprints were still there, clear. And then, a loud knock sounded behind me. Bam! The bedroom door closed by itself. I tried to turn the handle, but it was locked. My chest tightened. I wasn't alone there. The air grew thick. The metallic smell in the room intensified. I looked back at the mirror, and now there was something else there. Behind the girl, a tall figure with gray skin and long fingers held her by the shoulders. Her eyes had no pupils, and when she opened her mouth, there were no teeth, just darkness. My breath failed me. The glass of the mirror shattered by itself. The shards fell to the floor, but none of them reflected my image, only the girl's. She was now inside the room, with her back to me, dark hair disheveled, her white nightgown stained with something dark. She whispered without turning around, "We can't leave." My muscles locked. The door behind me shook as if something wanted to get in. The wood creaked. The girl turned her face slowly, and her eyes were black as emptiness. "You're already part of this." Her voice wasn't that of a child. It was slurred, old, and then the doorknob began to turn. I threw myself against the door. Something on the other side was trying to get in. The knocking grew louder, and then a sharp sound, the sound of nails scratching on wood. "She's here," the girl whispered behind me. I turned my face. She was no longer there, but the shattered mirror now reflected something behind me. The woman, tall, thin, deep, empty eyes. She was standing there, watching me, and before I could react, the door opened. I woke up in the hallway, the cold floor against my face. My breath came in short gasps. The room was intact, the mirror uncracked, the door open, and then I heard Ivy calling from downstairs, "Daddy, who is the girl here?" My blood ran cold. I ran downstairs, and at the end of the hallway, I saw her silhouette, the woman in the mirror, standing next to my daughter, holding her hand, smiling at me. Blackwood Asylum closed over 50 years ago. The government claimed bankruptcy, but the townspeople knew the truth. Patients disappeared. Inhumane treatments were administered in secret, and when the investigations began, the director simply vanished. Since then, no one dared enter the building. But that night, I would break that rule. I am Ryan Carter, an investigative journalist. Stories of abandoned hospitals have always fascinated me, but Blackwood Asylum was different. They said that no one who entered after it closed came away unharmed. Some lost their memories. Others were found wandering the streets, mumbling meaningless numbers. And then there were those who were never found. It was a rumor, and I was there to prove that it was just that, an urban legend. I walked through the rusty iron gates. The moon was covered by clouds, casting long, distorted shadows across the stone path. The huge building loomed before me, its broken windows like empty eyes. The front door was open. I took a deep breath and walked inside. The smell of mold and old medicine filled my lungs. And then the door closed behind me. The main hall still had marks from gurneys dragged across the floor. Yellowed medical papers were scattered across the reception desk. The flashlight illuminated a dirty bulletin board. There were photos of patients, but all of their eyes were crossed out. A chill ran down my spine, but I kept going. The silence was absolute, until a laugh echoed down the hallway, low, faint, but too close. I turned quickly, my heart racing. The flashlight trembled in my hands. The hallway was empty, just old doors, some ajar, and then I saw something move at the end of the hallway, a long, thin shadow crawling across the floor. My blood ran cold. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my ego told me to keep going, and I made the worst mistake of my life. I took a step forward. The hallway seemed to stretch out. The air grew heavy, as if someone was breathing next to me. I reached the door to a room and peered inside. The beam of the flashlight revealed an old gurney tied with leather straps, and on the wall, someone had scrawled words with fingernails or something worse. "The director sees everything." I felt a chill, but before I could retreat, something pulled me inside. Something pulled me into the room. The door slammed shut behind me with a bang. My lungs seized. The air smelled of mold and dried blood. The flashlight flickered, and then I heard the whispers, low, multiple voices, but all saying the same thing. "He's coming." My eyes swept the dark room. There were broken chains on the walls, deep scratch marks on the floor. In the corner, a patient dressed in stained white scrubs. His skin was pale, his head tilted to the side. His fingers scratched the concrete, forming a strange pattern. When he noticed me, he smiled, but it wasn't a human smile. His teeth were worn down, as if they'd been sawed off. And then, he whispered, "The director wants to meet you." My body froze. The flashlight flashed brighter. The sound of voices grew louder. "He's coming. He's coming. He's coming." The patient tilted his head, as if listening for something, and then he looked behind me. My muscles locked. A chill ran up my spine. I knew what that meant. There was something behind me. I took a deep breath and turned. The door to the room was open, and in the hallway, a tall, skeletal shadow watched me. The director. His old uniform was torn. His face was a blur of twisted flesh, as if no one remembered what he looked like. But his eyes, black, empty. He took a step forward, and the ground shook. The patient began to laugh, fast, maddened. "He'll show you what everyone forgets." The director raised a hand, and then everything went black. I woke up in the operating room. My arms were strapped to a cold iron gurney. The overhead lights flickered, casting distorted shadows across the walls. On the table next to me, rusty instruments still dripped something dark, and in the background, he was there, the director, watching me. "Do you want to know the truth?" His voice was low, slurred, ancient. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. He reached out, touching my forehead with long, skeletal fingers. "I'll show you." My mind was invaded. I saw fragmented images, patients trapped in cells, screaming for help, doctors smiling as they tested experimental drugs, and in the center of it all, the director. He was the one in charge. He made them forget, and now he wanted me to forget too. I struggled. The leather of the straps creaked. "I don't belong here." He tilted his head. "Now you do." And then I forgot. I woke up in the hallway of the asylum. The building was silent. The doors were open, but I didn't remember who I was. Only one sentence echoed in my mind. "The director sees everything." And then, as I looked at the glass of the broken window, I saw my reflection, my white uniform, my pale skin, and behind me, in the darkness of the hallway, the director smiled. My mother never wanted to tell me who my father was. She said it didn't matter, that some truths were better buried. But when I turned 18, I received a letter with no return address. Just 3 words, written in dark ink: "Come to Salem." And that night, my life changed forever. I rode the bus for hours, staring at the deserted road and the twisted trees that seemed to watch me. The town of Salem was covered in thick fog. The cobblestone streets creaked beneath my footsteps, and the old houses whispered stories I didn't yet understand. My destination was a large house at the bottom of the hill. When I stopped in front of it, my instincts screamed to turn back, but something inside me kept pulling me forward. The door opened by itself. Inside, an old hall lit by flickering candles. The smell of burning herbs and incense filled the air, and then they appeared. 4 women in black, standing at the top of the stairs. The oldest one stepped forward. Her eyes were as hollow and empty as a starless night sky. "You're finally back." My chest tightened. "I've never been here before." The woman smiled. "You belong here, even if you don't know it." My mouth went dry. Another woman approached, younger, with cat-like eyes and long fingers. "There is power within you, but it is still dormant." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What power?" The old woman replied, "The same that ran in the blood of all the women in your lineage." My heart pounded. "I don't believe in such things." The women looked at each other, amused. Then, the youngest raised her hand. The candles went out at the same time. Silence filled the mansion, and then, a shadow moved in the darkness. I was not alone there. Something was walking around me without touching the ground. The skin on my arm prickled, and then, a cold, hoarse whisper in my ear. "We always knew you would come." The candles relit themselves, and before me, a hooded figure appeared. His eyes were 2 glowing slits, and in his hand was an ancient book covered in strange symbols. "It is time to wake up." The hooded figure handed me the book. The leather cover was ice cold. The symbols etched into the surface pulsed, as if alive. "Read it." My throat went dry. "I can't." The old woman at the top of the stairs tilted her head. "Then why have you come?" The candles flickered. The shadows around us stretched, forming strange shapes. The hooded figure stepped forward. "Your blood has already sworn that oath. Now it's your turn." My hands shook. "What oath?" The cat-eyed woman smiled. "To never deny who you truly are." The book opened on its own. The pages flipped violently, stopping at text written in red ink. I didn't recognize the words, but I understood them. My eyes followed the lines. My mouth murmured the sounds before I even realized it. And then, the wind roared inside the hall. The candles burst into tall flames. The air grew thick, heavy, charged with electricity. And then, I saw it. The shadows weren't shadows. They were eyes, hundreds of them. watching my every move. My skin tingled, and inside my mind, a voice whispered, "Welcome back." I fell to my knees. My head spun. The women around me smiled, pleased. The old woman came closer, touching my forehead with cool fingers. "Now you see, don't you?" My lungs burned. Something inside me opened. The book. It wasn't just a book. It was an invitation, and I had already accepted it. The hooded figure held out his hand. "You are one of us now." I swallowed hard. My heart was pounding, but I knew there was no going back. I belonged here, and deep down, I had always known. The dirt road seemed endless. My car bumped over the potholes as I followed the directions the realtor had sent me. On the horizon, the sun disappeared behind the twisted trees, casting strange shadows along the way. The farmhouse was isolated, perfect for a fresh start. At least, that's what I thought. My name is Nathan Carter. After my divorce, I just wanted a place away from the city, where I could breathe again. The farmhouse, built in the 19th century, was huge. Weathered bricks, tall, dark windows, the kind of place that was steeped in history. But as soon as I pulled in, I noticed something strange. The fields around me were dry, as if nothing could grow there. The realtor was waiting for me on the porch. "You got here before sunset," he said, forcing a smile. "Was that a problem?" I joked. He looked away. "Of course not. It's just, some people say the nights here are different." That got stuck in my head, but I ignored it. People always make up stories about old places. The inside of the house was even stranger. The furniture was covered in dust, as if no one had lived there for decades. The floor creaked under my footsteps. The mirrors were covered with sheets. The realtor handed me the keys. "If you need anything, call me." And then he left too quickly, as if he wanted to leave before nightfall. The first night was strange. The silence of the farm was absolute. No wind, no crickets, just the house breathing on its own. Then I heard footsteps. Outside, someone was walking across the field. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the porch. Darkness swallowed everything, but then I saw it. Fresh footprints in the dry earth. They led to the field and stopped in the middle of nowhere, as if someone had simply disappeared. That's when I heard it, a voice whispering behind me, low, creeping, ancient. "You shouldn't be here." My lungs seized up. I turned slowly, expecting to see something, but the porch was empty, the door to the house closed by itself. My heart was pounding. I gripped the flashlight tightly and went back inside, but as soon as I closed the door, someone laughed. Low, feminine, and it was coming from upstairs. My body froze. The second floor was still empty. The boxes were still closed, the furniture covered. But then, the creak of wood, footsteps. Someone stepped down a step, then another. Then it stopped. The air around me grew heavy. I felt something, someone, watching me. And then, in the covered mirror beside the stairs, I saw a reflection. A woman, in a white dress, long hair, her face blurred, as if it were wrong. I turned around suddenly. Nothing. The stairs were empty. But when I looked back into the mirror, she was closer. And now, she was smiling. The mirror shook. The woman was smiling, but her reflection looked wrong, distorted. I turned around as quickly as I could. The hallway was empty, but when I looked back at the mirror, she was even closer. My lungs seized up. The flashlight flickered. A strong smell of damp earth invaded my nostrils. And then, I heard the first whisper, low, dragged. "She's still here." The sound didn't come from behind, or from the mirror. It came from inside the house. I walked up the stairs slowly. With each step I took, the silence grew thicker. The house wasn't just old. It felt alive. The air grew heavy, and a chilly wind rushed past me. Then, I heard laughter. Faint, feminine. But now, it was coming from inside my room. The doorknob was cold. My chest was rising and falling fast. I turned slowly. The door creaked, and then, The room was empty, but there was something new there. In the center of the wooden floor, footprints, small, wet, leading to my bed, and on the pillow, a headprint, as if someone had just lain down there. My heart was pounding. I approached slowly. The smell of earth was stronger there. I lifted the pillow, and beneath it, an old photo. A woman, white dress, long hair, sunken eyes, and behind her, a charred barn. I turned the photo over. There was writing, a name, Eleanor, and 3 scrawled words. She never left. I felt a shiver run down my spine. But then, I heard a sound in the hallway, a slow shuffling of feet, as if someone was waiting for me to open the door. I gripped the flashlight tightly and turned the knob. Nothing. The hallway was dark and empty, but the smell of earth was now coming from downstairs. I walked downstairs, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The wind blew softly through the closed windows, and then I saw footprints in wet dirt leading to the back door. The knob turned on its own. The door slowly opened. The yard was plunged into darkness, and there, in the middle of the dry field, the silhouette of a woman watched me, motionless, pale skin, white dress, Eleanor. My feet were rooted to the ground. She wasn't moving, but I could feel it. She wanted me to come to her. The wind grew stronger. The earth seemed to shift beneath my feet. And then, she took a step forward, and I heard it, low, cold, inside my head. It's time to know the truth. The world didn't end with a bang. It ended slowly. First, the radio signals disappeared. Then the skies turned red. And when the moon rose, bleeding into the night, humanity was forgotten. What came next? No one can explain, but we all felt it. It was as if something had awakened, and it was hungry. My name is Ethan Carter, and I should be dead. The bombs fell 3 months ago. Some say it was war. Others say it was something much worse. But it doesn't matter anymore. The world we knew is over. Cities burned. The sky was never blue again. And those who survived changed. I walked alone down destroyed roads. I passed empty houses, looted supermarkets. I heard whispers coming from dark alleys, but I never found anyone until I got to Vault 17, a bunker underground, dim lights, cracked concrete walls, 50 survivors, the last remnants of humanity, or so we thought. The vault was quiet. People didn't talk. They didn't ask names. They didn't smile. They just stared at the ground, as if they already knew it wouldn't last. And then I saw him, the man in the dark suit, tall, pale, with sunken eyes. He never ate. He never slept. He just stood in the shadows of the hallway, watching me. On the second night, something changed. The generator started to fail. The lights flickered. The air grew thick. And then, we heard the first scream. It was coming from the dormitories. We ran there, but it was too late. The body was wrong. The bones were crooked. The eyes were empty. And on the wall, written in blood, "He is here." Panic took over. Someone shouted that we should leave, but there was nothing outside, so we stayed. We tried to ignore the noises in the hallways, the shadows that moved on their own, the smell of sulfur that permeated the air. And then, on the third night, the blood moon shone again, and one by one, we began to disappear. I woke up suddenly, my mouth dry, my breath labored. The refuge was completely silent. I could hear only the sound of my own heart beating. The bed next to mine was empty. The mattress was still warm, as if someone had just left it. But no one left. No one ever left. And then I saw it. At the door to the dormitory, the man in the dark suit was watching me, and he smiled. The man in the dark suit smiled. It was a wrong smile, without emotion, without humanity. His sunken eyes were empty, as if they absorbed all the light around them. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. That's when I realized I couldn't breathe. My mouth opened in a silent scream. My lungs felt empty, as if the air had been forcibly knocked out of them. The man didn't move. He just stared. And then he spoke. His voice was low, cold, like the sound of something crawling in the darkness. "Wake up." My eyes widened, and then I was plunged into darkness. I woke up in the hallway of Vault 17, the cold concrete floor against my face. My head throbbed. All around me, lights flickered dimly. The smell of sulfur hung in the air, but something was different. The shelter was empty. I stood up, my heart hammering in my chest. The dorm doors were open. The bunk beds were skewed, the mattresses torn, as if something had been there. And then I heard it, a distant sound, low, like a whisper coming from the end of the hallway. I didn't want to follow it, but my feet moved on their own. The walls of the hallway seemed to close in around me. The air grew heavier, suffocating. Each step echoed on the cold concrete. And then I reached the door to the cafeteria. It was ajar, and behind it, the sound continued, a low, incomprehensible murmur, like several voices talking at once. I pushed the door open slowly. The flashlight trembled in my hand. The room was dark, lit only by the faint light of the blood moon shining through a vent. And then I saw it. The people from the refuge were there, but they weren't normal. Their bodies were twisted, their skin too pale, almost gray. Their eyes were sunken and empty. They were all sitting around a long table. At the head of it was the man in the dark suit. He looked at me and smiled again. "He's finally awake." His voice echoed in my mind. The other survivors turned their heads at the same time. Their necks cracked like rotten wood. Their eyes didn't blink. They weren't breathing. And then they spoke together, voices overlapping. "Come sit with us." My vision went black for a second. My body wouldn't obey me anymore. I didn't want to go, but my feet moved on their own, each step heavier than the last. The blood moon shone outside. I knew there was no escape. I sat down at the table. The voices whispered inside my mind. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But when I looked at the glass of the vent, I saw my reflection. My eyes. Now they were black like theirs. And then I understood. The blood moon didn't bring the end of the world. It just showed us the truth.